Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Jacksonville Jaguars Insider Podcast. My name is John Shipley. I am your host and beat reporter, and I've been your beat reporter covering the Jacksonville Jaguars for On SI every single day since August 2019. And we are continuing to march forward through yet another offseason together. Today we are talking about Jacksonville Jaguars General Manager James Gladstone and his first comments on the Jaguars 2006 free agency period. Obviously, we can't say the Jaguars 2026 free agency class because as of this recording, the only addition the Jaguars have made via free agency has been running back Chris Rodriguez Jr. They, more importantly, have put a focus on retaining some of their own free agents. They've had, I believe it's now 6 players who are on last year's roster have now signed elsewhere. 5, I want to say, were free agents, and 1 was released. Be Andrew Wingard, Greg Newsome, Devin Lloyd, Travis Etienne, Johnny Munt, and De'Ami Brown, who just signed a new deal with the Washington Commanders, which I will admit is a fairly good bit. Cash in for the year with the Jaguars, go right back to what a situation was. I think that when you look at how the Jaguars have approached this offseason, and when you looked at the context of the team coming into the offseason, nobody's surprised. It was clear what the Jaguars had to do, in my opinion. This is not a scenario where we were talking about the Jaguars as a team that was about to blow money and make a lot of moves, and suddenly they're just staying quiet. That was never the assumption. The widely held belief across the entire NFL was that the Jaguars weren't going to be a very active team this offseason. And I know so many people have seen the James Gladstone quote about comp picks, etc. I think what the Jaguars have done has been more about their cap space. They spent some money because they had to spend money to re-sign Jacoby Myers, to re-sign Cole Van Lannon, to re-sign Monteric Brown. So they've obviously made moves. They've spent some money, but they just never had the financial flexibility to go out and make a bunch of big other moves. And I've seen some people have odd reactions to Gladstone's comments. I'm not sure what alternative people wanted for the Jaguars. I wouldn't have paid Devin Lloyd and Travis Etienne that much money. The fact that the Jaguars didn't, and the Jaguars have the best sense of evaluation on both of them, to me says something. This is one of the worst free agent classes I've covered in my time covering the NFL. I don't know what players out there that the Jaguars should be really kicking themselves now that they got outspent on. And if you're thinking like a Logan Hall type deal where you got like $7 million a year, the Jaguars probably could have done that. They probably just chose not to. And I don't think it has anything to do with comp picks or anything like that. I think that's just their evaluation. I'm struggling to think what people's expectations were for the Jaguars this offseason. I think, at least locally, I think most people have it. You're always going to have some people who are just so trained to living on March news. I mean, the Jaguars won so many off seasons in the 2010s and the 2020s to this point. They didn't produce in many good seasons. I'd say produced in 2, 2017 and 2022 seasons. They went to the AFC Championship or 1, went to the divisional round the other. Otherwise, most years the Jaguars spent big. It did nothing for them. But Jaguars fans are so used to, okay, what's next? What's the next signing? So the fact that they're no longer in that era, I understand takes some getting adjusted to. Nationally, I don't understand really any pushback when Gladstone says that they're kind of focusing on collecting comp picks now. It's what good franchises have been doing for years. It's what the Eagles pretty much do in every offseason. It's what the Ravens do. Yeah, would you like to go out in free agency and sign guys to major deals? I'm sure they would, and sometimes they do. The Jaguars spent money last year, but last year was a very different offseason. The Jaguars wanted to add an influx of talent to the roster, And plus, they had the money to spend to a relative degree last year. Because of the dead cap with guys like Tyson Campbell and Gabe Davis and Darnell Savage, that takes up a healthy, chunk of a percentage of their cap space. They're just not in the same situation. Here's Gladstone. He said, quote, "Man, quite a bit different than a year ago today. We came out of the gates, what you might call us hot, signing double-digit free agents, external free agents right off the bat a year ago. And the whole approach to that cycle was raise the floor of the football team, and that was part of it. We're at a stage now where a higher volume of draft capital is what we're hunting up in those compensatory picks. When you think about high-priced free agents of ours ended up signing elsewhere, well-deserved contracts. A lot of guys that have already announced the signing, they did their part to put themselves in really sound positions to earn that, and excited for all those guys. In return, by not signing any outside free agents, we recoup 2027 draft capital. And I think on its surface, you would think, okay, you're going to make picks in 2027. Whereas in reality, those draft picks and having more of them actually allows you the luxury of remaining in the hunt at different intervals throughout the entire calendar year for acquiring players. You think about training camp a year ago and using a day 3 pick to acquire a wide receiver in Tim Patrick. You think about ahead of the trade deadline and being able to use 2 picks on day 3 to acquire a wide receiver in Jacoby Myers. Without that draft capital at your disposal, you may not be as willing or able to relinquish some of these future picks. So by building that up now, it allows us the luxury of remaining with the flexibility to do those sorts of things as we move into the next stages of the offseason and into the regular season. Now, I don't think this is James Gladstone saying we're not signing anybody because we want to stock up on 6th-round picks to draft rookies. But a 4th and a 6th got them Jacoby Myers last year. You're probably getting a 4th, 5th, and 6th in comp picks for this class. And while they won't technically have those picks, until this time next year, you can certainly project that they will. And by that projection, they can, move 4th, 5th, 6th round picks so next year in trades. It's a strategy that worked for the Jaguars last year. I mean, having more draft capital is never a bad thing. They have 11 picks this year. At the moment, they're projected to have 10 picks in next year's draft. I would assume they leave this year's draft with some picks for next year. Whether that's just trading a pick this year for next year picks or however it looks. I would assume that they just want to stock up on more and more potential resources to make moves. And just because they haven't made one yet this offseason doesn't mean they're not to. I do firmly believe that. Also, speaking to it on Thursday, Gladstone shot down both the Max Crosby and the Brian Thomas Jr. really buzz. He was asked directly about them being reported involvement with Max Crosby and the pass rush and said that wasn't necessarily something that we were actively engaged in. We're always communicating with other clubs on the landscape of their thoughts, and I can tell you we never got down to a real dialogue exploring that. That to me says they checked in on Max Crosby, but as we've been telling you guys, those reports that they were in the running or one of the final teams for him when he got traded to Baltimore just never seemed to actually be the case. And Gladstone more or less made that clear here that, of course, that is not the case. That's the biggest thing Gladstone has to do as a general manager right now is find more pass rush. It was true last offseason. It's true this offseason. They have to figure it out. And I realize there aren't a lot of avenues to doing so. It's not like teams are actively letting a lot of pass rushers sit in the market. I think that's one season. Like I said, one reason they're collecting up on these picks. He was also asked about Brian Thomas Jr. and if they've received any trade offers to BTJ. He said, no, we haven't. And there hasn't been a ton of dialogue around that front as teams check in simply because it seems like, I know the word reputable came up earlier. I don't think there's been any reputable statement. We don't have any real action on any of those fronts. I think you think back to where we landed at the end of the season where our passing attack was. We have no interest in disrupting the momentum. We look forward to continuing to build off where we left things. And I know that Brian Thomas is a big piece of the puzzle. And we don't want to make sure that gets disrupted at any time. It's the same thing we've been telling you guys. They clearly value Brian Thomas Jr. I believe when he says no offers have been made. I think teams have clearly made contact with them, but I think it's also clear that this isn't something that Jaguars are actively searching to do.